Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Jstfish Outdoors. I'm your host, Dale York, and this week we'll be talking about fall bait selections, times and tips on using the different baits in different conditions, and also be getting some reports from a couple of anglers, one down on Lake Fork, Chris Haas, who's the owner and proprietor of the Burning Stump Lodge down on Lake Fork. And folks, if you're going down, give old Chris a call or look him up on the net. That's at Burning Stump Lodge down in Alba, Texas. He has a very unique lodge down there, and it really is a fine place to stay while you're down on the lake fishing. We're also going to hear from Dave Clark, who's a local striper hybrid guide, and he'll tell us what he's been up to this week. In addition, Dave is also one of those guides who does the springtime spoonbill catfishing, and he can hook you up with one of those as well. So let's start off by seeing what old Dave Clark has to say, and then shortly we'll be back and talk about what's going on around here as far as the bass fishing goes.
Hello, it's David Clark, Fish On Guide Service, doing my weekly report for Dale York's Jstfish Outdoors podcast. I just got in from Sooner Lake a while ago. Sooners seem like every trip over there this past week's been getting better and better. We had the best day of the year so far on Sooner. It didn't quite run out of bait, but we didn't have very many left over. They were wanting the smaller shad, the better. If you can find some small thread fins, they were really gobbling them up real quick. Seemed like if we used the bigger gizzard shad, they would hit them and they'd be on for a while and they'd pull out. Most of the hybrids were anywhere from 2 to 3 pounds. We did have some 4 and 5 pounders, but most were in the 2 to 3 pound range. Just a whole lot of fun to catch. Water temperature there now after this last little cold front dropped down about 68 degrees. It's a little bit dingier than what it had been this summer, maybe from the rain and stuff that we've been having, but it's still a really good day over there, and it seems like it's getting better and better. Most of the fish we caught, all the fish we caught today were anywhere from 21 to 30 foot of water, and I don't think we caught a single fish today on free lines. Everything was on down lines. Sky took place giving a few crappie reports and 25 foot of water around the brush. Water temperature up there is about the same. Keystone Lake is just real muddy. I haven't seen any reports from there other than guys can't find any fish. Anyway, that's all I got for this week. Fish on.
Thanks, Dave, for that report. Once again, guys, that's Dave Clark with Fish On Guide Service, and he kind of specializes in the striper hybrid fish around here in northeast Oklahoma, but also does the spoonbill down in Grand Lake Chain, up above Fort Gibson as well. A lot of people come in for that, and he can definitely put you on those spoonbill as well. The next person we're going to talk to is Chris Haas down on Lake Fork, and like I said, he owns the Lake Fork Lodge down on Alba, Texas, and it's just an excellent place to stay. And let's see what Chris has to say.
Hey guys, this is Chris from Burning Stump Lodge in Lake Fork, Texas. It's October the 18th. Water temperatures hovering around 75 degrees, and our lake is only about 8 inches low right now, so the lake's doing pretty good. I just want to give you a few insights on the way I've been catching a few bass here lately. First thing in the mornings, I've been going to grassy pockets and fishing up real shallow, finding the bass chasing shad, using flukes and sinkos and even small swim baits. Seem to be working really well first thing in the morning. Later in the day, I'll try to move out a little deeper. I try to find about 8 to 15 foot seems to be the magic depth. Looking for bait fish in timber. I try to find that timber in about halfway back in the creeks and coves, and sometimes out on the points. Find that timber in 8 to 15 foot. It's real key to focus on using your graph and finding the bait fish before you start fishing. Don't just go to any point and go to fishing in 8 to 15 foot. Use your graph, find the bait fish in the area, and the bass will be hovering around that timber right behind them. In those areas, I'm using a more finesse rig. I'm using a small shaky head and a drop shot. And sometimes it's been a little tough getting them big fish out of the timber, but that's part of it. That's Lake Fork. You're going to get your heart broke every now and then. So those are a few insights, the way I've been catching a few fish here lately. I hope it helps you out. We've got the Berkeley tournament coming up this weekend. Good luck to all the contestants, and everybody be safe and careful out there. And if I can help you out anyway, give us a call at the Burning Stump Lodge at Lake Fork. Phone number is 903-850-1189.
Thanks, Chris, for that report. Once again, folks, he's the owner and proprietor of the Burning Stump Lodge down there in Alba, Texas, and he just has a wonderful, wonderful facility for the fishermen down there. Very, very nice place to stay. And if you're interested, look him up on the web as well, the Burning Stump Lodge, and he can really fix you up with what's going on down there. So, thanks a lot, Chris, for that report, and we'll look forward in the coming weeks for more reports to Chris. Folks, he alluded to some interesting things that I'll kind of point out as we go through my favorite baits. He was talking about matching the hatch, talking about using smaller swim baits because evidently the shad that they're feeding on down there are smaller fish, and that's really, really important. The other thing he alluded to that's extremely important is when you get out there in that deeper water looking for those fish, you really, really rely on your eyes underwater, and that's where that great Lowrance equipment comes from. I run the Carbon 16 on and the Carbon 12 on my Ranger, and boy, I tell you, they've just become over the last few years just most important piece of equipment on the boat. Matter of fact, I just can't imagine going out and especially targeting these fish schools in the deeper water. In the summertime and in the fall, it is just so important to have good electronics on your boat to help you maximize your fishing time on the water. We don't seem to have as much of it as we used to sometimes. And boy, I tell you, it is such a great help. It can really mean the difference between you having a good day on the water and just zeroing out. So Lowrance just makes a complete line of electronics. They have something for every price point, every price range, depending on what options you want and how you want to use your electronics. I'm a pro staff member. If I can help you, feel free to drop me a line, justfishoutdoors@justfish.com. You can also reach me on Facebook at Justfish Outdoors. That's with JST, folks. And I'll certainly try to help you any way I can. You want to hit that like button and subscribe button out there on YouTube. One of the things we'll do in the not too distant future, Lowrance is introducing some equipment in the not too distant future that has really got us excited around the Lowrance camp, and I think it's really going to be a very hot selling item, especially with the upcoming holidays. So if you get the opportunity, like I said, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and you'll stay up to date on what's happening, especially in the electronics world. So stick around. We're going to have some very, very good information, some good shows coming up. If you guys have a subject for a show that you'd like us to do a segment on, or some information that you'd like us to help you with, feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll certainly try and help you out. Just Fish Outdoors, like the slogan says, teaching the art of fishology, and we're all about transferring knowledge and helping people out. For those of you who may not know me, I've been in this fishing world for well over 50 years, and or well over 45 years, and just been very, very blessed to be involved in it for many, many years, doing a lot of things, everything from pro bass fishing to guiding to teaching, as I travel around now and do my seminars on nighttime big bass strategies. Lunker hunting is kind of what I've evolved into, and I've been very fortunate to catch fish over 10 pounds, and I try to help other people do that as well. So anyway, stick around. Like I said, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and we'll certainly try and help you any way we can to learn and pass along information that may be helpful. All right, folks, that'll bring us into our segment for tonight. I've been asked to talk about, or asked to kind of portray my favorite baits and maybe some of the conditions to which I fish them in the fall. And what I'm going to do tonight is go through some of my baits and throw out some tips out there that hopefully will help some folks as to when I use different baits at what times and why. And so we're going to go through that, and we'll just start off with the first bait that's on my hot list tonight, and that's swim baits. You know, when fish are targeting shad and bait fish, these baits can pay off big time in the fall. Pay attention to the weather conditions. High bluebird skies just after a cold front may not be the best conditions for this bait. Start shallow, work your way deeper. Also pay attention to the size of bait fish. We alluded to that a while ago. Chris Haas did as well about matching the hatch. You know, also remember these shallow fish are chasing and you know, really after bait, so try and match that size to your lure selection. If these fish are feeding on gizzard shad that may be 5, 6, 7 inches long, throw a bigger bait. If these fish are feeding on threadfin shad that may only be 2 or 3 inches long, you know, downsize your baits to match that hatch. It can be very, very critical, and it can mean the difference between you catching a lot of fish and not catching any. So try and match that hatch with your lure selection. You know, that one little bit of information can be more important than color. It really can make a difference. You know, it's been my experience that wind and stable weather conditions are optimum for these baits. You know, this bait is better in clear to slightly stained water. You know, natural shad colors along with variations with wide are suggested. You know, don't travel too far from the shad combinations, and I think you know, you'll be very, very successful with this bait. The next bait we'll talk about briefly is jerk baits. You know, folks, jerk baits have a lot of tendencies that the swim baits don't, meaning you can fish them slower. In some cases, you can fish them more erratic. You know, jerk baits profiles are similar to the swim bait. However, jerk baits can be worked much slower, offering a really tempting injured morsel to those hungry bass. The weather conditions for this bait may be somewhat less cloudy to less windy. Watch for nervous shad activity in shallow water, which may tip you off that you know, there's a roaming bass in the area and he's feeding. Also watch for fish following your swim bait that don't necessarily commit and strike. Often a fish that will not commit to a swim bait will jump on a slower presented jerk bait, especially with a little more erratic action. Also try and match the size of the bait fish. You know, we talked about that earlier in the swim bait selection. The bass are feeding on your lure selection. This is one little bit of information that can really, like I said earlier, be more important than color, is to match that hatch. This bait also seems to perform better in clear to slightly stained water. Natural shad colors are also you know, preferred, along with maybe some of the chromes. Once again, you know, if you're fishing in clear water, you may even want to go down in line size, line diameter to increase those strike ratios. But you know, it's not a bad idea to have both of these baits out on the front deck at one time. You know, you may be throwing a swim bait and you may get a follow, or you may get a little nip, but the fish really doesn't strike wholeheartedly. Sometimes you can throw that jerk bait back in there and twitch it, and that fish will just jump all over it like it is really, really good. The next segment of the lure selection that we'll talk about is what happens, this time of year when we get those cold fronts that roll in on a somewhat regular basis. It can be really, really tough, and we don't always have the luxury of selecting the day that we want to go fishing. A lot of times, we have to go fishing when we can go fishing, and that doesn't always, coincide with the best days as far as weather conditions. We may be fishing 12 hours after a cold front has come in, and boy, I tell you, those fish, they get lockjaw and they just sit out there and they don't do anything. So it can really, really be time to pulling your hair out is to figure these fish out and how to get them to bite. They can be so neutral, or what I call negative, that my goodness, it just will really, really be can make for a long day when you're trying to fish for these fish right after a cold front, and that's really where these finesse baits come from. The finesse worms and the rigs can be extremely effective during high bluebird days, just after cold front has blew through, or when the fish are neutral or negative, as I alluded to earlier. These smaller profile baits can be lethal in a variety of rigs when used on smaller diameter line, coupled with spinning gear. And it can really mean the difference between you having a successful day on the water and going bust. It can really help you out a bunch. So don't be afraid to downsize everything when you're fishing under these real tough conditions. Everything from lure to line size. Color suggestions range from the greens like watermelon with red flake for a little bit clearer water conditions, to bubble gum, to all kinds of strange colors that may trigger a strike from these fish that are very, very negative. So don't be afraid to jump out there and downsize everything, especially if you're fishing your baits that you have a lot of confidence in and they just don't seem to be producing. That may be the time to downsize to these smaller baits, downsize to your 6 and 8 pound spinning gear, and just really having to work to get these fish to bite. It really can be a very, very successful lure selection for when those conditions are very, very tough. So don't forget to do that as well. Have a selection of those lures available, especially if you think you're going to be fishing in less than favorable conditions around those cold fronts, because it can really get tough around there. The next selection of lures that we're going to talk about is something that's really not normally thought of. A lot of people put their topwater baits up, at the end of summer, August or so. They kind of go in the back end of the boat or get taken out of the boat and get put back in the garage. And folks, that's really not a good thing to do, because the topwater baits can really be very, very productive in the fall. Many anglers, like I said, tuck these things away, and it's just not a good time to be doing that. When the fish are up shallow and chasing bait, topwater baits can be deadly, and especially deadly on big fish. I utilize these baits even when the water temps fall well into the lower 50s. The two baits that I always carry in the fall are the Zara Spook and the Buzzbait. And on windier days, I choose the Buzzbait and prefer the Spook on calmer days, especially if there's very little wind and we got a cloud cover. These baits can be very productive on shallow feeding fish, concentrate on the long flats early in the fall. Make long casts with these baits, especially the Zara Spook. You can, with 10, 12 pound test line, you can throw that Zara Spook almost out of sight and fish it a long ways from the boat. Remember, these fish, many of them, are on the flats chasing these shad up shallow, and they're in less than 5 or 6 foot of water, and they're very skittish, especially if you're fishing a little bit clearer water. So make that long cast, fish a long ways from a boat, and you'll find that to be a little more productive than fishing closer to the boat. It is just one of those little tips that can really pay off big time. I choose the buzz bait, obviously, on when I have more wind. It can be very productive on shallow fish, and it can be it's just a totally different end of the spectrum. It makes all kinds of racket, where walking the dog with a spook makes very little racket. And those shallow feeding fish and water temps can really make the difference here. So, one of the things I like to do as the water temps fall, as they get on down from the 60s into the 50s, I look for more. I come off the flats and look for more steeper banks, fishing the main creek channels, fishing the main creek banks. I'm looking for that steeper bank. It seems like as the water temperature falls more and more into the 50s, those fish tend to back off of the flats a little bit, and so do the shad. They tend to get more toward deeper water or close to deep water, and the fish follow them right out there. They're not going to be too far. The fish aren't going to be too far from their dinner plate. So that's one thing you really got to focus on through fishing all these baits that we're going through right now. If you're not around shad, then you need to go find shad, because these fish will not be far from their dinner plate this time of year. They're feeding as much as they can. They're trying to get as much bulk up as possible, getting ready for that dormant state when that water temperature gets down, in the 50s and even in the high 40s in some cases. Their fish's metabolism slows down tremendously, and they're just trying to put on enough bulk to get through the winter time like many other critters are. So seek out those steeper creek channel banks and throw parallel to them. Don't a lot of the fish will really kind of sneak in or hold tight sometimes to that bank. They may be in 6 or 7, 8, 10 foot of water, but they're not very far from the bank because the bank is steeper. So fish those baits parallel to the bank, and you could be surprised and have just a wonderful day doing that. Once again, the colors or shad colors or the chromes, things of that nature. It's kind of hard to beat those and any time of year regardless, but especially in the fall when those fish are really keying on those shad. And that'll bring us to our last selection. I just can't do a show without talking about the jig or the Carolina rig. You basically have more than one type of pattern in the fall. And what you have is, you have the shallow pattern, depending on the conditions of the day and the weather conditions and also the water temps. But you also have sometimes even a more consistent deep pattern where you're out there targeting these fish in 8, 10, 12, 15 plus feet of water, like Chris Haas of the Burning Stump Lodge talked about earlier in his report. And you can find very large schools of fish in the fall that are holding in these creek channels, ambushing these shad schools as they float by, and it can be extremely productive to find these fish with your Lowrance electronics, and then sit on top or nearby these fish and maybe start throwing a Carolina rig with some creature bait or some smaller finesse bait, and catch 2 or 3 fish out of that group, and then your bites go away. And what you can do is you can then go to a jig and throw that jig out there, and sometimes that will fire that school back up, and you'll catch several more fish out of that school, and then just repeat the process over and over and over. You know, it is can be just a day where you catch, you know, 30, 40 fish in a day, because you're fishing these different schools that you found halfway or a quarter way or three-quarter way up the back end of a major creek, somewhere in a creek bend or something similar to that. And it can really boost your numbers that you catch in a day's time. So, you know, there's always those two patterns that seem very prominent in the fall. And so don't be afraid to switch back and forth. You know, if you're fishing deep and you caught fish early and now you're not catching fish, you know, the only thing consistent in the fall is change. And you know, these fish can just move from shallow water to deep water to shallow water. It is amazing how rapid a pattern can disseminate or just totally go away. It is really interesting sometimes to try to figure these fish out. So that'll about do it for this week's show. You know, we've covered my favorite baits. And what I try to do when I'm fishing some of these lakes, it is just something I've perfected over the years, and something that works. And it's kind of hard for me to throw much anything else in the fall. But you know, one of the things, if you've got prime weather conditions, one of the top tips I'll give you, if you know, you're 48 hours or more off a cold front and the weather conditions are stable, the lake is stable, you're not having a big pull down like some of the lakes do in the fall and in the winter, you know, fish shallow, put on something that you can cover some water in, because many times these fish are everywhere and nowhere. You know, it is just a question of covering a lot of water to catch a lot of fish. But the main key that you have to remember is, if there's no bait, there's no fish. So you know, that's the number one tip that I'll give you. If you're fishing in a creek or arm or wherever and there's no bait in there, you're not going to be catching any bass in there either, and probably not much anything else. So hang around in there and find those schools of shad, and you're going to catch fish. It's just that simple. Folks, hit that like, subscribe button over there on YouTube. If there's something subject that you'd like us to do a video on, feel free to send us a link or information. You can catch us on Facebook at Jstfish Outdoors. That's with JST, folks. You can also reach us on YouTube as well. Email, you know, just anything that you'd like us to help you with. We'd be more than happy to do it. Like I said, we'll be coming up with some very interesting shows. Being on Lowrance Pro staff, I've been talking to some people that really are getting ready to introduce some really exciting equipment coming up for this year, late this year. I'll also be doing shows later on, you know, around the holidays to help you help those people that are buying gifts or needing gifts for that angler in the family. I'll be doing a show for that, as well as some of the others. Once again, Jstfish Outdoors will be live every Thursday evening at 7 o'clock, and we'll be more than happy to discuss whatever emails that we get along the way and try to put a show together for you. So without further ado, this is Dale York, Jstfish Outdoors, saying we'll catch you later.